So good to have everybody here today. This topic of note taking, it is something that has been bubbling up. I feel like more and more, maybe that's just how life works. As I move to things in my own business talking about note taking, but it keeps coming up. Like, what are you doing with notes? And how are we using AI to automate our notes and note takers? But then, Enoma and I did a hacker hour a while back, and just like the topic of note taking in general was a bit buzzy. Like, why are we doing this? And is it okay that everything's in the cloud and everything is recorded? Do we want that to happen? And what's the point of having all this information and how do we parse through it? And so, while I think the topic of note taking seems like kind of like a thing on the surface, there's buzz around it, and so I'm happy that we're going to talk about it today. We're going to go around and do a quick round of introductions. I am Blessing Richardson, founder of Sela, and I help small businesses figure out how to move into becoming product companies by deploying products, whether that is internally or externally, and mostly right now that looks like turning their products into AI. And so that's really, really fun. Enoma, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, I'm Enoma and I'm the CEO at Zachary. We are an agency that helps small teams to design their tech stack to help them accomplish millions of dollars worth of business. And we use a lot of different tools and platforms, as well as recommend a lot of tools and platforms to our clients. So, this timely conversation about AI and note taking is going to relate to a lot of the work that I've been doing and hope to continue to do with those clients. And I'll hand off to you, Ian.
All right, my name's Ian Petersen. I'm one of the partners at New Common. We're an software outsourcing agency. We provide, custom software development and staff augmentation services. It's all around the idea of solving all issues in and around software and technical development for mid-sized companies and startups.
And Paige.
Me. Okay, I am Paige White under Paige Rene Coaching. I'm a leadership and executive coach. And so I work with women in all areas of performance, corporate, athletic, and business. And the goal is always to create more trust and influence, no matter where you're starting from, so that you elevate to a new level of confidence that you know is attainable, but you haven't reached yet.
So, note taking. Paige, why do you take notes?
Boy, to kick it off, two main reasons is one, recalling information that I want to expand on later. Maybe I don't have the time to do it now, but I want to elaborate or look into it later. And two, to make sure I'm using my potential client's language or my current client's language when I'm selling and trying to meet them where they're at, and then also making sure that everything is moving from what I call Island A to Island B in my coaching relationships with groups and teams.
Okay, that's okay. So let's talk about what's Island A, what's Island B.
Island A is where they're starting. So, right. So, if I'm working with an athletic team, softball, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and they say our team's very disconnected, we have a bunch of transfers, we have a bunch of returners, a bunch of new people, and we are really looking for a little more trust and camaraderie. And then
Mm-hmm.
we're also looking for how to bring that into performance on the field. Where they're at right now, being disjointed and new, is Island A. And then together we take this boat over to Island B, which is where they desire to be. So
Okay.
that is what performance coaching is in a sentence.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. And I saw you nodding a lot when she talked about messaging and speaking your client's language. What about that jumped out to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We were just bonding before this because I had gone through some of the coaching training, so I understand the specific language, but this idea of using the same words, uh, I think gives the sensation of being more heard, rather than me paraphrasing and putting in my own map or my own judgment into the situation. So I think it betters understanding when you're communicating with someone else, using specific words, especially on key topics.
Hmm. That's a different spin because I think growing up, so I don't know what y'all's primary education experience was, but for me that looked like I think around third, second grade, maybe third, fourth, there was a thing about Cornell notes, and we had to learn how to take notes in this particular format and standard. And the whole point of taking notes and the way we learned it really early was to take notes for yourself, right? take notes, and like in real time, you're supposed to figure out and triage like what's important, what's need to know, what I need to come back to. You kind of develop a shorthand and you do all other stuff, and you do it consistently so that way it serves you. But an interesting part of this conversation we just talked on is actually taking notes in a way that serves the other party.
Yeah, I can jump into that really quickly. One thing that drastically changed my business, a specific example, was I was marketing to female athletes transitioning from the college space to
Mm-hmm.
their career. And I never used the word anxiety. In my mind, it was a challenge not to use it. This was just a personal thing. So I did some qualitative research with 50 different former female athletes, and it was like 85% use that word regularly. And so I said, okay, obviously I need to start using this in marketing. And so it became almost a magnet for drawing in my ideal client, which was just not part of my verbiage or my language. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting too how certain people, I mean, you know this very well in the AI world, Blessing, when you're working with somebody who doesn't understand necessarily what they want and they're trying to explain it in their own language. It's that language that you need to know to pull them in. And so I think it's a huge piece of marketing, at least personally.
And Noma, how have you been engaging with the why you're taking notes? Like, what is that? Where does that sit for you? Why do you even bother with it?
Well, the perspective that I have for taking notes actually comes from the thought process that I go through when deciding what is noteworthy. And a lot of the professors I've had in college, a lot of the training that I had, even in middle school and high school, was around being able to hear information and then synthesize that information. And I know that this is maybe more of a lost art because our shift towards tech tooling or maybe having teachers who share the slides with people might make us think that the purpose of note taking is to be able to see or review the information that was presented to you as it was presented to you. And I don't think that's the case. I think that taking notes is different than having notes. And so I really think a lot about why do I take the notes? Well, it's because I need to distill what is worthy of note and then be able to reference back to it to rejog my memory of the broader context, not just about what was said, but also about my thoughts about what was being said.
I'm thinking about that personally because when I think about how I take notes, or really how like the type of note taker I am and how that shifted, and figuring out what is noteworthy. I think at first it was calling out things that I might be prone to forget or that I didn't understand. Right, I need to follow up on. Um, and then it shifted more with consulting to what are things that the other person is emphasizing, right? What are moments where I'm like, okay, you said something, but is that really what we're saying? Where you're clearly saying this. There are gaps, and it could be even someone else is speaking, and I'm stumbling. I'm like, wait, this is the point where I'm going to have to come back. Like, you're really committed to what you're saying, and I don't have a frame of reference for this, right? And
Mhm.
so this is, I think, the type of note taker I was when I was taking it by hand, which was more shorthand, and it was like all these little highlights, all these call out moments, right? The note taker I have become with, I think, the influx of technology is one that like hoards all the things. So from a digital perspective, I have automations that capture every transcript I have where my note taker comes up. It saves it in my cloud, and I have a desktop automation that doubles it and saves it on my machine. Because I got burned waiting for notes one time, a transcript and notes, and then there was like an internet outage and I didn't have it. And I was like, if I had just had a local backup, this probably would have helped me in these intermittent times, right? And
Mhm.
so my brain goes, have all the things, not just the notes that you get, but have the source, the transcript itself, right? Um, but then my note taking has shifted in real time to um, becoming even shorter. I'm looking for like the hyper moments when I'm writing by hand, right? Or it is more of, it's less of notes and just mapping something logically to continue the conversation. So like
Yes.
what I'm doing, the digital stuff has
Yes.
changed what I'm doing on analog. How's that been for y'all? What shifts have you seen?
Uh, I can jump in there. So for me, analog has become kind of a hierarchy above digital to tell me what is important. So like you'll see a bunch of books there. Those are the ones I really, really like. I still have a Kindle with hundreds
Mm,
of books. The same way that I have thousands of notes on my laptop, but what is truly and absolutely important is on my notebook every single day. And so for me, that's kind of a higher degree of importance. I dedicate and give it more time and energy to that,
Mhm.
and it's more of a process. That's kind of how it's evolved, especially with all the AI note takers and everything that generate quantity. I also agree with what you're saying, Blessing, of this like hyper highlighting what is key,
Mhm.
especially in the context of the goal of the conversation. I agree with something that Paige mentioned earlier about kind of well, you said island A, island B. For me, was current state, desired state. So
Mhm.
when we're speaking with a potential customer and they want to develop XYZ products, uh, I need to know where they are, where they want to go, and why. And the note taking for me is also a way for me to understand what questions I need to ask to further my understanding. So sometimes my notes are not necessarily structured like they would if I'm taking a class. They are more erratic, maybe some diagrams, maybe it's more about what they're saying, what I don't understand, what questions I have. So if you look at my notes after a call, it'll probably be uh, only readable by the extract I write down afterwards. So it's more of like a tool in the meantime.
Mhm. No, I agree. My notes are very rarely readable um, at all. It is a running joke. I've known my husband for a long time. We were in high school, and it's a joke because he used to try and like take my notes, and still to this day, he's like, "That is your code. Like your notes are your code, and it is for you and about no other human, right?" And there is a difference between that in situ. I'm writing this down for me and my processing. And then
Yeah.
the okay, now I need to like revise this for future me. Because future
Mhm.
me is not going to understand between the scribbles and the missed dots and I's what just conspired in my head, right? And so it's good to see that that part of our processing is still intact. And then almost from the conversation that we just had, we might imply that the digital consumption of like notes and information has allowed us to hyper focus on only what matters on the analog side. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take this one away first. I remember, I think we've maybe all been in a situation where I've been in a meeting and either I didn't have my AI note taker in there or it's been in person. And there's a little piece in the back of my mind that's like, oh my gosh, I have to pay attention more so because I don't have this like safety net of a note taker. And in the same breath, what I try to do is actively listen better in my client sessions, and it allows me to
Mm,
be more present, which I really enjoy that. So I've also challenged clients in this way too. If I have a client that's a furious note taker, it typically comes from a fear of not remembering or not trusting yourself. And
Mhm.
so I will task them with, hey, I'm going to provide you notes after every call. So I want you to trust that you're going to get what you need to receive in this call instead of missing something and feeling like you have to write your notes down. So I actually can't even recall the original question now, but I've noticed it helping with recall when you intentionally know that if you miss something, there's something there, but also you know what's going to stick out in the forefront of your mind, and you can kind of compare what AI has versus what you remember.
mm. So speaking about what AI has, how useful are those AI notes? The
Extremely.
actual, really, so the actual
I
notes that come from the AI.
So I mean, I think they start to become extremely useful when notes are not just for me or for ourselves, and when other people need to be involved. For me, that note taker is a great way for me to reference later on if I have questions, but it's also a great way for me to produce and kind of um, yeah, fine tune documentation that needs to be created from that call. So if I have a discovery call or if I have a product meeting to determine what a feature is going to look like, that summary is extremely useful for me to log change requests or
Hmm.
oh to talk about the feedback that they had on this and that. So when it comes and to communicate that to the rest of the team, as you said, my notes, analog notes, not everyone might understand, and
Hmm.
for me to kind of process that manually and create that is much more time and energy consuming than, oh, I can refer to this work on it and then distribute it. But it takes much less energy and time to do that. All note takers, they're not perfect. They're definitely not perfect. I do not lean on them 100%. I still process them, but they are a huge time saver. And even across the team, my team, after every meeting, there has to be a summary. No
Mhm.
questions asked. There has to be a summary. You need to communicate what you understood, what the next steps are. Otherwise, the meeting might as well not have happened because there's
Right.
no accountability. So to have that is a great tool to be able to put out that documentation and have documentation not be an issue.
I love that. We're gonna dig more into the team thing, but while we're doing
Sure.
that, for the audience, how are you handling notes? If you can share in the chat, is there anything that you're doing that has worked that hasn't worked with your notes, or something that you're stuck on? You're like, I wish I could do this better. We'd love to know that. And then Ian, you mentioned with your team. So,
Yeah.
hmm, how has note taking in the team dynamic, in any other ways, how's that changed for you?
Um, I think to each their own at the end of the day. If they want to have a notebook or post-its on on their desk, that's fine, but it's all about the process for us. So
Hmm.
we have a process where certain documents are expected at certain times,
Hmm.
like a summary after a meeting, or like like a discovery brief at the end of a discovery process, right? We
Hmm.
have documents that are expected that must be reviewed and approved. So for us, it was more about generating that process. Um, and the process forcing the understanding of what needs to be done. So, like to say, I'm taking a class, part of the process would be, oh, I need to create a summary for each unit. So now I'm forced to, uh, use my understanding to create a synthesized document. For me, it's all about having a process that we can kind of scale out and have many people from many different ways of thinking or ways to process, which you can't really tailor one to one, but the
Hmm.
output you can. So yeah, that's how we've approached it.
Hmm.
Okay.
I'm gonna. Oh, this might sound like really simple questions, but humor me, okay?
Of course.
When you're in a team dynamic, how many note takers show up in the meeting?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Uh-huh.
Mm. So for me, in our case, like in a daily stand up, it'll be the
Hmm.
project managers.
Hmm.
Uh, so the project manager is the responsible in that case to make sure that information is where it needs to be. So
Hmm.
it's theirs. If I'm in a client meeting, maybe we both have one. Uh,
Hmm.
but because we're separate parties. But within a team, usually we try to have one person responsible about information management.
Okay. And so that doesn't look like an internal meeting where everybody has their own like note taker account. And so you have like a double head count. You have like everyone there and their note taker. So we're not doing that at New
Uh,
Common.
no, I mean, we'll have like maybe a leadership meeting
Hmm.
when like the whole like the small circle of the leadership, we all have our note takers. Maybe a meeting or two, but we try not to. It's a bit overkill.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, sometimes it's a bit overkill, but it happens. But it's not the plan.
Right. So then what is the process afterwards of sharing those notes?
Oh, for me, documentation is email. Email is the one
Mm.
place that we can go to and say, I said this thing on this day, Slack, WhatsApp, SMS, everything gets forgotten. There's no structure to it. It's legally, it's not useful or it's not as useful. So summaries, email. Like, oh, this is
Mm.
what we talked about. These are the next steps. These are the delivery dates, and it's so much easy it's so much easier to kind of hold yourself or others accountable to that. um that is for meetings, right? That is for summaries.
Mhm.
For documentation, we use Notion for a task manager. So we have the task manager, we have the documents. Sometimes it's Jira and Confluence, but there's always a system that contains everything that needs to be done when it comes to a project.
Mm.
It's really use case specific. But we have all those use cases mapped out.
Yeah.
Paige, I see you nodding, and I know that like the dynamic that I have in my own business is similar to you, where we are delivering our services often at a very small touch point, small scale. So we don't really have large or internal meetings. Does this look any different for you when you're meeting with external parties, or if you do have contractors hopping on a phone call together? How many note takers do you see, and what do you recommend?
I'm more of a simplest, like I'm not the person to hoard a lot of information. I'm the person to like throw away something that I really wish I had. So let me just preface it with that.
Mm,
Um, in meetings with my clients, I allow them to have like their note. I mean, allow sounds like really stringent. They can have note takers in there. It doesn't bother me. But for my purposes, for with a client, I'll take circle back because that's what Blessing recommended. And I do to actually circle back to earlier in the conversation, the action items at the top is very helpful because again, performance coaching for me is all about forward momentum. So I want
yeah.
them to be able to see the action pieces between each call. So that is probably my favorite feature. But I don't just copy paste blindly. I've been experimenting
Mm,
with Zapier to get those notes into a Google Doc, into a Google Drive, but then each client has built out tabs. And what's nice about that for me is one, I'll proofread it before I email them, but two, um, I'll then feed it into ChatGPT every now and then for like each client bot and just make sure that like, hey, at the beginning of the call, when you hired me or when your company hired me, we're following that outline that I gave you. And so everything is backed up with record and just proof that there is that forward momentum. And I would say the same as like, if I get on with somebody I'm working with a team at Walmart, like I will get on there and make sure that again, all of this is rooted in what you said you wanted because for what I deliver, it's not as tangible. And so I really have to rely on what those words are that they use and then how also asking good questions like Ian said earlier, like if this is what you want, like more cohesive communication with your team, how do you feel like that's going to best be measured? And so it's even more important because it's not like they're walking into what we do and coming out with a product or an app or like something very tangible. So I have to
right.
be even more mindful to be rooted in what they said they want and how they're going to measure that.
Paige, I know you, I believe you work with an assistant in the kind of the back end of your business. How does your note taker show up in that dynamic? If it doesn't too, that's also valid. You're like, we got this.
No, it does, but she's always got hers.
Hmm.
And so she has more autonomy of her notes. So like in
Hmm.
we use Asana, and so like the things that need to be in Asana are there. But I also have worked with her long enough that the trust has been built prior to using AI notes, I'll be honest.
Hmm.
So sh she's very diligent about her work. And so we both have notes that like maybe I'll go back and reference if I need to, but I very rarely need to. And then our projects are in Asana. Sorry, I don't
Okay.
have a more fun answer for that one.
No, 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 no. Well, it wasn't about it being fun. I know I've gotten a lot of questions in the wild, not necessarily on this webinar or this conversation about like how are we handling the influx of multiple note takers? What do you do with this information? How do we triage and share it? When do you need it? When do you don't? Right?
Mhm.
And I think to Doug's comment, he made a comment a bit earlier, and he said taking notes physically places information into your brain in different ways than just observing.
100%.
Reading them later has other different functions. And so as I'm kind of parsing through how we're talking about this right now, we started talking about more about what we do when we receive information, right? How we're ingesting all the information live in a conversation and taking our own notes. And I think the aftermath is everything about reading it and consuming it and using it after the fact. And naturally, that all sounds like for a lot of us, it's moving that into tools, right? Like we're kind of archiving this and reshaping the notes themselves into different systems for different purposes, whether it's project management, it's documents and follow-ups. Ian, you mentioned email is your kind of like your source of truth for official comms, right, for y'all.
With my clients, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, yes, with your
Mm,
clients. And then Paige, you mentioned Asana is how you're working with your assistant. And so, Enoma, I would kind of volley the question to you as well. Um, what is your flow of captured notes in a group setting to all these little things after the fact? Like, how does that work for y'all at Staffrey?
yeah. Well, I am a huge advocate of reminding my clients that they are the client. They're the client every time they work with an external vendor. And vendors, it is our job to close the loop and project manage internally. So note taking is about many things when I think about how I service my clients. First, it's actually having a record of what was said. That's useful for the immediate, action, but it's really helpful for longer running projects. Um, for me, it's most important. And in my physical writing of notes, I'm always going to highlight what a decision was. When a decision is made and what are the reasons behind that decision, to me, are like a structured parent child relationship. No linear note taking app or AI is going to think the same way that my brain thinks about the branch logic of decision making. 9 times out of 10, something shifts in the duration of a project. We're making
Mhm.
strategic decisions about what platforms do and don't work for a team. If a team tells me that mobile first, they are mobile first, and we are only looking at mobile enabled platforms, and then I learn that they are actually a multinational organization or they travel a lot, I actually undo the branch logic to go back and reprioritize because all of the apps that can help you sync to a platform are not always apps that are very mobile friendly. But if you have a company where people are offline frequently, this could be a higher priority than what we decided earlier in the flow of the project. So decisions and why the decision was made is something that's like a huge call out. And then, of course, key takeaways, what to do after the call. All note takers are designed to help us do that. And I think that's our like traditional Cornell way of thinking. But service businesses, IT departments, like HR departments also need to be taking notes on tone, on literal vibe check. What was the vibe
Mhm.
of the call? Is this client coming to you in a state of chaos and an internal, like frenetic place? Keeping note on what is the overall sentiment of a call is actually empowering in terms of how you respond. And it empowers you to shift the atmosphere if you're actually paying attention to what the atmosphere is. And then, of course, finally, how do you go above and beyond? This is something that I've tried to train AI to understand, but it hasn't quite yet. I don't just want to do what the action on the call should be, but I want to think about potential obstacles and I want to think about how to delight the customer in excess of what we actually committed to. And those are the kinds of things that you think when you hear something on a call, no AI note taker is going to know. Oh, but maybe they said that their daughter has a birthday coming up this weekend, and I know that she's a Spy Family fan. Let me just send them this cute little journal or notebook. I can get it to them in 5 days. That's the stuff that I think really comes around the client relationship and people management. That's not just what was said on the call.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's with AI, yeah, you could try to get it to go above and beyond, right? Um, but also all the effort, because I like my brain is immediate, like, well, technically you could build a thing that does it, like a nice little GPT that goes and analyzes your transcript and always looks for the above and beyond. But I think the point is that, like you're mentioning, it's the listening and hearing it. And I had a conversation with Bill French not too long ago, and how he was talking about, transcripts are actually a really rudimentary way for picking apart a conversation.
Mhm.
Because it's the words. It doesn't have the tone. It doesn't have the vibe. The vibes are lost in a normal transcript. Of knowing inflection, of knowing what is high energy moments, right? And while we do have, there is AI that can literally understand a video in real time, the same way that we process it with our eyes. We have computer vision models that can look at it and process it, right, and hear that. That's not the technology that we see in our transcript tools yet. And if they did, they would jack up the price like twice as much, anyways. So like maybe we don't need it, right?
Yeah.
And it brings value to the human touch for us to still be attentive, I think, to your point, Noma, and be listening for those things. If we want to delight um, from person to person, then maybe I might be really good at that. But I look at some of my own struggles with even understanding what's going on in a conversation sometimes.
Mm.
When I was in corporate with corporate training, we do postmortems, talk about what could be better, and all this other stuff. But what I found is that when it came to like the frequency of meetings and things that we were doing, technically it was always on you from promotion to promotion, from project to project, to do your own internal debrief, right? To always keep track in your own decision log and your own stuff. It was always on you. But then we get training around bias and really consulting, understanding your client, right? Working with vendors and parties. And then I find, if we're not doing those in a group setting where I can bounce this off someone else, I'm actually really reiterating my own cycles of bias, right? Like I can have a one moment, meeting with my manager and get corrective feedback or a peer or hear something that went really well. It's not always corrective, right? It's do more of this. But the time it takes for me to process that in a way that it changes what I'm doing, it changes the way I show up in my own behavior, and it builds a new habit, that takes time. And so, what actually needs to happen is this corrective mechanism. That's not just the one off sometimes. It's the corrective thing of, hey, you missed this opportunity. Oh, you missed it again. Oh, this is the third time you missed it. Maybe we should look at it this way, right? That doesn't happen a lot in corporate environments because we're all moving so fast. We all have things to do. And so, things that like ways that someone might think to delight a customer, or I might choose to like to light a vendor or be better with a team member, right? That's not natural to me. That's a blind spot ultimately. And what I find is that working with AI to process my calls, my transcripts, is that I'm finding how many blind spots I really have sometimes because the AI is going to be more consistent in looking for certain things. And in practice, like I did a discovery call for something, and I had this customer come through, and I was like, I don't think this is a really good fit client. Like, how did we get so misaligned? And then I was kind of beaten on that. And then finally I said, you know what? Let me just go ask my AI. And so I uploaded the transcript from the call. I uploaded the ask and the description of the service and then my ideal client profile. I gave it all these things. And I said, help me understand if this person was really that ideal person. And it broke down for me in all the ways this person actually was. And I said, oh, I got exactly what I was looking for, but I had other expectations that I did not communicate really well. And I was therefore auditing the conversation and reviewing it from an improper lens. Technically, I got exactly what I asked for. And I should have been willing to say, yes, this is an amazing client and that we're going to move forward. But I wasn't actually clear of expectation in my ask, right? And so that was the part where I would have normally walked away and gone, well, that's not really great. And then I was like, ooh, I made a commitment. I put out there that I was going to do this. You actually did fit what I said. I'm going to work with this person because that's what I said I would do. I'm going to go back later and fix my messaging and positioning and figure out how to coach these calls better to fix it. But that would have been a whole blind spot that I would have just thought I was right on my assessment on. And so it's great to have that team dynamic sometimes, but even in structures where there are people around, you don't get the actual feedback of a team. And I find that sometimes AI is great at providing that. Has any of you had an experience where AI almost like checked you and you were like, wait, that didn't go down the way I thought?
Yeah, 1000%. This kind of branches off note taking, though. Sometimes, okay, so I'm obviously in this line of work where it's leadership coaching and performance coaching, and the emphasis is knowing what it's like to be on the other side of a conversation with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it just takes some really tough looking in the mirror, like you suggested, Blessing. And so, like, one of the ones for me is I'm really quick to formulate an idea and sometimes quicker than when I bring someone along with me. And so it can feel like I'm moving at a quicker pace, or I've honestly heard it come across as a know it all, which kind of hurts to hear. But in the same breath, um, when I am formulating a challenging conversation. Like I have a whole framework on having a powerful conversation or having a challenging conversation, but even I'm still human. So despite that framework, sometimes I'll have my emotions involved. And so I remember one specific time where I laid out the entire conversation with it was AI notes, and it was after a Zoom call. It was my AI notes. It said I wrote in like how I'm interpreting this, what I wanted my next communication to be, and I said I want it to be receptive, not defensive. And my chat bot literally was like, "Well, you need to rewrite the whole message because if you send this, it's going to come across as extremely defensive." And I'm like, "Me, and I'm so glad I did that." So for more like challenging conversations, being able, you have to add your framework, you have to add your understanding. So it's just like, it's just like the whole uproar of social media where it's like, oh, it's a good thing, oh, it's a bad thing. It really is just about the user. And so it's same with AI, like it has to be about the user. I'm not going to copy paste notes and quote unquote, like just be lazy if I want to just check the box with my client, if I want to provide that great experience like Enoma was talking about, then it
Hmm.
requires me to get involved because I'm the one that they're wanting to work with. And so that's an example of where I definitely needed to be checked. And I knew I did. I just didn't realize the extent of how defensive I was going to have
Yeah.
my response sound because of how assertive I am in general.
Hmm. So there's this thread there in what you said, which is you asked the question. You have to ask the question to receive that feedback. And then a lot of that is, I think another way I see that is not necessarily going to AI to just give you an answer, but
Mm.
to kind of coach. And I know when we talk about AI, it's like, oh, I asked it and it did this thing. But technically, unless you're dealing with a really amazing custom model, right?
Yeah.
Which most of us aren't, we're using these general models right now. We're still actually coaching the experience, right? Because these AIs are made to help and to please. And so that's why they hallucinate or lie a little bit. And so what it sounds like in that instance, Paige, is that you set it up to give you critical feedback, and you're almost in a way coaching it. When you say give it your framework method, you're coaching it. And so,
Yeah. It was
what? Go ahead.
it was important for me. You brought up a great point. Not to use generative AI like a vending machine. You're not putting in money and getting out something. Like you are supposed to be teaching it. And so in that instance, I know from like interpersonal work that there's a very big difference between intention and behavior, or
Hmm.
motivation and behavior can be used instead of intention. So in that chat in particular, I had to say, here is my motivation and here's my intent. And then here's the message I'm drafting. Are they aligned? And the answer was no.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think that also speaks to some of the skill set that is needed in business, right? We can talk about like taking notes or how we engage when we're the consumer of something, but when we're working, collaborating with our peers or reporting to someone or working with a client, our communication is actually in a context, right? That is work, that is productivity. And I think that by virtue of having to work with powerful AI models that are simple, there's an opportunity for all of us to do a better job of actually learning how to engage at work with people. Um, there's always an opportunity for feedback. I remember having this conversation with my intern a couple of months ago and explaining that a one-on-one is not a time where you show up to a meeting and I just give you things to think about or talk to or ask you questions. Actually, at Thackeray, we follow the model where the one-on-one is hosted by the employee and the manager is essentially reporting to that meeting. But there's always a time for feedback to the employee and for feedback to the manager. Why even do that? Because collaboration only ever improves if both parties help to adjust and align.
Mm.
And so even in the way that we prompt AIs or when we're choosing AI tools, the ability to shift the needle so that both you, the person, and the AI platform are better aligned in the outcomes that you're seeking actually exponentially increases the benefit of the output.
Yeah.
Mm.
And to one of the things you're mentioning, I heard Enoma. I really do think of note taking as an extension of how we can listen. We were talking with Paige earlier, this idea that listening is a skill set that isn't formally taught. Uh,
Yeah.
in most education, it is an extension of our ability to listen. And when we're saying, okay, what is important? That's going to depend on the context. Who are you speaking to? What is important to them? And that is our ability to listen and to highlight what we understand. And when it comes to collaboration and working with teams, how we reduce reworks, how we reduce errors is by improving communication. Most of the software teams that we come in and work with, I, I, majority of their issues come and stem from lack of or inefficient communication. So I think asking the right questions, and actually actively listening and reinforcing what you understand so as to not kind of trail off in a different bearing in the same conversation, right? These things that aren't givens in conversations that you might have in a day-to-day, I think are kind of fundamental if we're processing our own thoughts, if we are ingesting information, and even when it comes to AI, right? AI is just it's processing the information that you give it And if you're not asking yourselves the right questions or framing it in the right setting, your output isn't going to be good. Uh, so definitely agree with that. But if the output isn't being good, then my first question would be, okay, is the context relevant, or have I provided the right context? Have I provided the right structure? Uh, and have I asked the right questions? I think are the big things when it comes to note taking and going through those notes.
I mean, 100%. All of those elements are required in note taking, using AI to kind of really be effective in helping you with that, setting that context, asking the right questions, and doing that. And so this brings us to like the end of it. And I've been sitting on like the techie tool side of it because, of course, I think that's where most people are like, okay, so like this is all great theory. Like, just tell me what apps you're using, right? But in truth, a good chunk of what we said is, yeah, the note taking apps are capturing the notes in the transcripts, but it sounds like most of us still have a flow where we are using an additional tool in the back end to get further into our notes and our transcripts themselves. And so let's just really quickly go around and say what apps we're really using, because that's always the question. So I'm using Circleback. Paige,
Yeah, I use Circleback.
Ian.
I use Fireflies. I'm playing around with Tactic as well when it comes to
Uh-huh.
AIs. And for analog note taking, I use the bullet journaling method, which is,
Mm.
I will live and die by it. It is fantastic. Anyways, yeah.
And then Enoma.
Agreed, agreed. I have a bullet journal, and that's what I use as my primary physical note-taking system. I do leverage Circleback AI as like on calls. And then also I like to use Fibry AI. So I use Fibry as my workspace management tool. It's like a Notion, Airtable competitor. And wherever it is not appropriate that I have like a AI note taker enter into a room, but I do have permission to record, I can just take the audio of any meeting that I'm in and throw it into Fibry, and it will transcribe and put it right inside of my notes or my tasks. So that's the
Cool.
triple stack for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Another tool that we've been using when it comes to the transcripts themselves and in different processes will grab that transcript and use it as documentation for whatever we're building up. So if I'm building out a proposal for a customer, or
Mm-hmm.
even if recruiting is trying to go through an interview, we'll use the actual transcript. Like, hey, I'm building out a proposal. This is the RFP. These are the emails I exchanged. This is the call transcript. That is for me a vital piece of documentation that I will ingest into we have an internal AI tool that we use for building proposals, and it'll make sure that everything kind of maps out to what I understood, to what was said, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a fantastic tool for recruiting, right? Did they answer the questions correctly? It's a great way to pass it on to a superior or a technical reviewer. Oh, yeah, they did. They did not have an analysis of how did this go, right? Most of the time, that analysis is more rational than it is intuitive or empathetic. Again,
Mm-hmm.
speaking software, and do they meet the requirements, right? So it is for that type of things. I think it's extremely useful.
Yeah.
Um,
As we continue to have more tech chit chat, you can anybody feel free to put your questions in the chat so I can surface them up as we do this. Um, so there are all these tools that we're using, and then you mentioned, Ian, you have your custom AI processes. I have my own custom automations around certain things as well, particularly treating transcripts as source documentation, right, and putting them into the process is a big one. And so you mentioned that you have a custom one. And then I know after the fact, I tend to put my transcripts into Chat GPT as well. Paige, you mentioned that. I will actually add mine to the knowledge base of a couple chatbots I have as well. So I can go in and say, hey, tell me about Enoma. And it will be like, oh, yeah, you talked to her like these last 5 times. And this is what you talked about, you know? And kind of have it automatically sync. And I'll do stuff like that. But like, are there other things, or other places where you are moving your notes to? And how are your apps that you're using to capture the notes helping, if at all? Right, because now I'm talking more like workflow and a little bit of automation. How are we choosing note taking apps that help us with the aftermath, or are we just kind of still manually moving things around ourselves?
I would say I'm still manually moving most things. My very, we were talking about this in our last mastermind call, but my
Mhm.
challenge is going from like circle back to a Google Doc to a Google Drive and then using that as source for my GPT about that particular client. So like trying to create one PDF that I can feed into the knowledge for that GPT uh, is the loop I'm trying to close, but what I'm doing mostly manually right now.
Okay. Okay, Enoma, do you have anything that you're doing to kind of tie all the different things together with your transcripts?
Right now, my current strategy is how to reduce actually the quantity of sources that go into decision making. Uh,
Hmm.
I I'm borrowing actually from some of the language that Paige has used, and especially like methodology, as Ian has talked about it. But I could sum it up by saying good decision making does not treat all information as if it's equal and important. And
Mm-hmm.
especially when we think about like what is the pain point that this person came to me with, my client, or if it's a team member, what is the purpose of this meeting? If the goal of the weekly team meeting is to align on priorities, then maybe I don't need every team meeting from October till now to reference for decision making, AI tooling, or even my own personal understanding. So my workflow right now is that all of my meetings and transcripts go into Fiverr. And so I have a database of meetings. I actually have a personal database where all my transcripts go, and then we have a team shared meeting note database, and I will
Hmm.
push notes out to the team meeting database. Um, Especially because at Zachary, I'm actually the only team member who does have an AI note taker. But again, that comes back to that principle of what does ownership look like? Uh, at, I'm the only person who's in almost every meeting in my business. Everybody else has a vertical that they own, and ownership looks like being present and me delegating to you in that space, but me being across a lot of verticals, being able to reference back and equip my team with what they need. So rolling that up to say, I'm constantly trying to remove things from my own mental shelf so that I can be a clear decision maker. And that also means in my tooling, thinking about what the life cycle of this information is. Do I really need every AI transcript from every phone call from 2 years ago? So I haven't landed on the answer for what my system will do in the future, but I know that I'm feeling the sense that meeting recordings, videos, those are ethereal references. There should be some sort of hierarchy to preservation, and almost like accounting files, like even the IRS doesn't make you have receipts beyond the last 7 years. So what does it look like for me to say, I keep receipts
Hmm.
on my client projects, on my meetings, but maybe not in perpetuity, maybe only for 7 years.
Mm. I love that. My tech stack splits notes and transcripts. I feel like transcripts are personal, right? Especially when you have the monologues, and I tried a couple different apps for monologues as well because they're not like meetings and I don't need the video and stuff. Um I think I might have solved my monologue problem though. By the way, I'm not an affiliate of this app. I don't even remember the name. I think it's like Aqua, maybe Aqua Voice, and it's Mac only. But what I love is that it solves a number of problems, and it's making me drop a number of other apps. I'm just gonna go there real quick. Literally, it is a dictation app, but it lets me upload vocabulary. And so, Enoma, your name is not a common name for most note takers and spellings. My husband's name, Cedric, ends with a K. It's not common, right? And so it's like all these things where it's like it's misspelled. Well, that's the one feature that I've been looking for, which is custom vocabulary. So I can go in, and its dictation is so great that it picked it up immediately, like immediate correction on names. And so I can use it to dictate into any app, and it puts it there, and it saves the audio and the dictation. This is all I've ever wanted. It's all you girls ever wanted, right? The note takers are just extra at this point because I have my personal context. It stays on my machine, my computer, and I'm really, really happy with it. And so at that point, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I need everything stored all the time. My transcripts are pretty private and personal. My notes, however, they're generalized, and I can choose to share them as needed. And I have a database that makes that accessible if I need to share notes with people. And that's about the level of triage I have. Even when most people like ask for transcripts, I'm like, if you want a transcript, bring your note taker, right? If there's a reason I know you need mine, then I guess I can share mine. But the assumption is that we're all taking notes with the fidelity that we need to capture what is important. And this archive of data, I think that we're all kind of building in the background, creating digital waste or e waste, right? Um, to your point, Enoma, it's healthy to think of it of having an expiration date, a purge date at some point, that we keep track of. So I think the question to kind of help round things out here is, are there things that we don't really want transcripts and AI note takers and recordings of? What is the kind of meeting that we say, you know what, we don't really need a note taker for this?
Sometimes if I'm having like a virtual coffee with somebody that I find really interesting, I try to make it feel as organic as possible, like as if I was sitting in the coffee shop meeting somebody. And so I think it feels like there's a little more of an agenda if I invite my AI note taker in there. That's just personal. So like for example, if Ian and I had like a one-off conversation after this and I wanted to, get to know him more, I probably wouldn't put my AI in there just because I would want it to feel more like a, coffee shop conversation, like I said.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's kind of like if you're in a coffee shop and somebody puts out a recorder,
Yeah.
you're just like,
Strange, yeah.
so who do you work for?
Yeah.
Ian, what about you? Are there places where you think intentionally to not allow your note taker to go into?
I mean, I agree with what Paige shared. If I had to add to that, it's possibly, the short back and forth conversations I might have during the day with the team.
Mhm.
So these are like checks or, oh, by the way, did you get this done? And this, not everything needs to be transcribed. Like if this is fluid communication, there are certain situations where having a transcript exist and having to deal with that, and it's just noise. It doesn't add any value to that, especially in shorter communications. And then when things I don't want to register, like a coffee chat or personal conversation, if I have therapy online, I'm not transcribing that. It's like,
Mhm.
so definitely. Oh, I also wanted to share something that the AI transcripts did help me with. If I can, I don't want to
Oh no, go
deviate
ahead,
from
go
it.
ahead.
So one of the interesting metrics that they provide is the percentage of time that
Oh,
each participant talked,
that
and
embarrassing score.
I think that's a fantastic metric, right? Because if I'm having a one-on-one, I want to listen. I want to be on the lower end of percentage. I want to be
Yes.
30%, 40% of the conversation of me speaking. So that's a good gauge of, oh, am I asking the right questions? And another exercise is you can grab a transcript and ask things like, hey, am I asking closed questions? Like yes or no questions. You're kind of targeting the person you're asking them versus open questions where you're leaving it open to whatever the answer might be. So, hey, what are my closed questions? Am I asking multiple questions at a time that get lost in translation? So, in understanding the words that are said, I think it's a great tool to kind of look back and see if you're asking the right questions, if you're leaving room for new information to come in, and if you're actually guiding the conversation to that desired state or island B.
That's good. I said that was embarrassing because I think the first times I saw that it was when I was using like fireflies. Um and it was like, what just happened? Why was I talking like 60% of the time? Like what, it didn't feel that way. And I think earlier on what I realized is out of nerves, I often over communicate, right? And I'm like, I didn't even realize I was that nervous. Like I knew I was nervous, but I was that nervous, and that's how it was presenting. And so
Yeah.
you're right. There's definitely a case where there's so much data, but again, it's like finding the through line and what really matters. Now that we have all this, we can get good feedback like that. And so I think this has been a great conversation all the way around about notes. Anoma, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah. Not all apps give that insight the same way. I will say shifting to Circleback was a little bit disappointing because they don't have like a real-time meeting
Mm.
assistant or like pop-up. And I had come from
Yeah.
Crisp.ai, which is a great tool for cleaning your audio, not necessarily a competitive tool in the AI note taker space. But because Crisp is an active tool that runs in between your microphone and your audio output to a video call, it would show you in real time. You can see the little light blinking when you're speaking, And you can also see the length of the meeting. And what I loved the most was if I heard something, but I wasn't sure on it, it would show me the timestamp. Like, where were we? How many minutes or seconds into the call? And I could literally go back and say, okay, reread whatever was transcribed at this exact moment. I know Fireflies does have a real-time assistant. I don't know what that user experience looks like if you have the desktop app, but consider when choosing your tools, what relationship do you want to have to the tool that's supporting you? If you need something that is going to, during the meeting, give you feedback, give you pointers, or give you visibility, you'll be looking at one set of apps. Otherwise, if you're looking for something really to help you capture and digest later, you're looking at another.
That's a really good call out. All tools are not equal, as some of us know very, very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
That's a reason why I've been using Tactic more often than not, because number one, it doesn't actually enter the call, so you don't have like this third robot entity that is part of a one-on-one conversation, which
Mm-hmm.
in the virtual space might feel somewhat invasive. So that was a good perk for me. And the other is the live transcript on the side. So
Yeah.
even if I misheard or got distracted, these things can happen. I have this reference real time where I can go back and reread if I didn't understand. It also helped me while during the conversation. So Tactic is a tool I've been using recently that I've enjoyed.
It's really, really good. As we round out, I'm going to put a link back to the event listing page on here because that's where you can find ways to get in touch with Paige and Ian on LinkedIn. This has been awesome. I think we covered a breadth. Like, I selfishly structured the conversation to cover things I know people have been asking me, like in one-on-ones and private conversations. And I'm like, look, guys, this is a loaded topic. And so I hope anyone listening that you got a good feel for remembering like why we're taking notes. Ultimately, it's people connecting, whether it's in the context of work product or not. It's people, and looking at ways that the tools behind us now with AI, modern tools, can actually support that agenda instead of kind of taking it over in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, this has been awesome. Enoma, anything to wrap us up?
Right. You can see how to get in touch with Ian and Paige. Just a reminder what they do. Ian and his team at New Common are experts in integrating AI into applications. And if you're thinking, hey, I don't want to build an app, but I want to be a better business person, I want to be better, or I want to be an executive one day, Paige is your girl. These are two absolute experts when it comes to professional use cases for tooling.
Yeah.
As you know, Blessing and I also do our own consulting, but cannot stress how awesome it has been to have this conversation with you, Ian, and with you, Paige. We always have so much fun every time each of us chat. So thank you for joining us today.
Yes.
Thanks for the invite. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yes.
This
Thank
is a lot of
y'all.
fun. Thank you so much.
All right. To everybody who joined us, thank you very much. And we will see you at the next Hack Hour.
Bye, everyone.